The moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. By the way, there's somebody who was kind of posted a bunch of comments. Eventually, had to just block the user. It got to be pretty offensive. You go after my family, it's going to go away. I'm sorry, not sorry. They're actually very much not sorry. But anyway, a person saying, hey, I asked around a bunch of comic stores and nobody knows a retailer named Perch. Give it up. You're not telling the truth. So I think it goes without saying, but in running a store and running a business and doing consulting work, I thought this was common knowledge. My name is not Perch. I know I said this is Perch P. Perchington, but my last name is also not Perchington. So when I ran comic shops, as I'm investing in other things, as I'm doing consulting work and all the rest, no, I'm not Mr. Perch. I didn't think that need explanation, but there you go. I'm in a bunch of retailer groups. What's interesting, and I'll do a video about it at some point. There's a retailer up in New York who got salty about a Kickstarter that wasn't delivered, and a bunch of creators just turned on him aggressively to the point that the retailer deleted their Twitter account. And the creators are kind of like patting themselves on the back, like, job well done. This person can't hide. We're going to continue to share screenshots. What a crappy retailer it was. And what's funny is, this retailer is pretty active in a bunch of Facebook groups, private groups for retailers. And the retailers are like, yeah, we're not carrying any of the books by these assholes, like a bunch of them. And, you ever see the meme of the iceberg? And it's often meant as an inspiration or sometimes a warning, where above water, there's a little tip of ice there, but under the water, there's this giant, block of ice. And the basic concept is what you see on the surface isn't necessarily the whole picture. And that is, thank you, Gar. That is absolutely the case with a lot of this stuff in comics. And it kind of feeds into this mail that I'm about to read. But, the surface, i.e. Twitter brawls, usually carries with it a big kind of underlying current. And, a lot of people get up to a lot of shenanigans on social media and YouTube and everything else. But there's kind of forgetting that there's a real business attached. There are shops that sell comics. There are people who go and take their money and buy comics. And there's real exchange of cash taking place. There's publishers that are outlaying cash for licenses and for getting books done and all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of business to this business. And it's easy to kind of forget that when we're having the Twitter feud of the day about who mistakenly used the wrong pronouns. It's like, that's nice, but, the business is sitting there under the surface. And one thing that is absolutely true, no matter what business you're in, comics or pharma or software or, insurance or whatever you're up to, you need friction. Meaning like hostility, fights, anger, weird brawls, stuff. All of that stuff is negative to business. No matter who wins, there's no upside to money taking place. Friction or conflict spooks people from investing money, from spending money, and it just gets quiet remarkably quickly. And a number of the creators who are really mobbing this comic shop are broke. They regularly talk about being broke. They post GoFundMes. They talk about, I can't afford this, $100 e-reader. And I keep expecting that at some point people put two and two together. That would basically mean some of these people can do math, which I'm pretty convinced many don't. But anyway, by creating such an angry, hostile, negative swirl in the business, you eventually hurt your own business. No matter who you are, no matter what side you're on, no matter what you're doing, conflict can rarely creates cash, and if it does, it's short-lived. I think there's plenty of crowdfunders figuring it out right now. There's only so far controversy can take you before eventually it's like, okay, what is the product, and have I put barriers up for people to purchase those products? It is a problem over time. Anyway, let me get into this mail because we're well into the video at this point. But mail's a short one. It says, "Hey Perch, I'm a little bit confused as to what to believe in regards to comic book sales. On one hand, I see videos like yours talking about how the 90s outsell today's comics. But on the other hand, I see a number of people inside comics, including people like Heidi McDonald, who runs Comic Beat. In case you don't know her, I am familiar, yes. In case you don't know her, talking about how comics are having a renaissance, a boom, some of the best sales they've ever had. What am I supposed to believe?" Well, you're supposed to believe math. I mean, math and facts. The comics aren't selling as well as they did in the 90s. They just aren't. The sales are lower. You can kind of twist and turn your way around all kinds of different forms of that math to a place where you go, the cost of a trade paperback is higher today than it was in the 90s, and so it needs to sell half as much in order to make the same profit. And if I look at the stuff that's manga related and I count it as a comic book, then I mean you can get into these weird scenarios, but on a whole, a monthly floppy comic is not selling as much today as it sold in the 90s. It factually, if you can go to Comic-Con, you can get numbers from the 90s there. You can compare them even to kind of the last time there were numbers pre-COVID, and the numbers in the 90s were higher. Like, on average, on mean, higher. Now, I saw one person do the math this way, which was no, let's take the average sum of all the comics in the 90s, and then let's exclude the bottom 300 of them, and then compare them to the full list of comics, in the 90s. And I mean, you could cheat with the math. You could certainly you can make up numbers, but it's doing worse. That's just a factual statement. The challenge with this entire argument, though, isn't are comics doing better or worse? It's the extreme version of that argument. It's, when people started complaining about comics, it was, man, these comic stories are terrible. I hate everything Marvel is doing. Now, that's a bit of a broad generalization. Marvel's putting out 80 comics. I'm sure there's one or two that are good, for you. I'm sure they're not all bad. But, some people said, all of the comics are trash. All of them. All of the comics have terrible art. Well, all the comics didn't have terrible art. You had Olivier Capiel, you had Pepe Larraz, you had other people doing, comics, and that stuff looked pretty damn good. So not all. It's the use of the word all or every that gets people into trouble. All the comics are bad. No, all the comics are not bad. But to counteract that argument, it wasn't enough to say, actually, there's a lot of comics that are selling. True. There is some great comic art out there. Also true. It's easier for indie books to get made than ever before. True. There's more diversity. And by diversity, I mean in theme. There's horror and sci-fi, slice of life, superhero, etc. There's more categories of comics than ever before. Okay, also true. All those things are true statements. But, and in particular, Heidi, but many others would post stuff like, comic books are doing better than they've ever done. Okay, hang on. That's an absurd statement. And when pressed, I would back up and say things like, well, I didn't say ever. I meant just it's doing really well. I mean, sure, if you want to compare it to 80s, that's not even comparable because 80s had the newsstand, so we can't even compare it to 80s. And the 90s also had a bunch of speculative stuff, so we don't compare it to that too. But if you compare today to, say, the first quarter of 2016, it's better than ever before. Okay, again, if you get funny and you play with the math, you can prove anything you want. But this is the problem with comics. It's a problem with this argument. It's not enough to just say, hey, quality is lower, or I don't like a lot of the comics coming out, or even I don't like any of the comics coming out. And you don't have to respond with, but every single comic is great. Everything is going great. The money is bigger than ever before. The sales are higher than ever before. That's the problem. When comic shops started closing, rather than just admit the, blatantly obvious, which is, hey, the price of comics have gotten higher. The direct market can't sustain it. The comic book business as a whole is dropping, and brick and mortar stores are hurting. All of those are factual statements, and running a small business, trust me, as somebody who knows, remember, I am Perch P. Perchington, retail owner. It's hard to run a retail business. It's not easy, especially comic books. There's not a ton of margin. Look, full stop. If I hadn't supplemented my income at various times with consulting work and other things, I couldn't have survived on a comic shop alone, especially up in like Alderwood when rent was going through the roof. Like it was expensive. And, a mini mall can go, hey, next year, we're just going to raise the rent by $500 a month. And it's like, well, shit, I can afford a person working the shop or rent, or I can go get money from somewhere else. And a lot of comic shops do that. They're supplemented by external income. Okay, that's not the definition of everything is amazing. Okay, but that brick it again. Is this all to blame on quote woke comics? No, there's a lot of reasons. And probably the biggest of them all has nothing to do with comics at all, and literally has to do with the fact that brick and mortar businesses are tough, and landlords raise prices, and rent got expensive, especially in the cities, and it's hard to run a shop. Rather than post articles just saying, yeah, you're the headwinds facing comics, people like Rich Johnston would post things like, no, there's more comic shops opening up than ever before. Yeah, 4 are closing, but 5 are opening. And others have pointed this out, but sometimes he counts comic shops as open 1 day a week in a flea market somewhere. Like a stall in a flea market is somehow counted as a comic shop. Well, nobody in their right mind would count that as a comic shop. So why are we doing that? I mean, again, that's just blatantly arguing with what you could see in front of your face. And this is hardly just related to comics. It's certainly in politics. You see both parties blatantly just make up shit that is completely untrue. And what's funny is they could tell a small lie and everything would be fine. They could go, when Trump had his inauguration, it would be one thing to say, we had a great crowd. We had a really big crowd. You could just say that. I mean, because it's also a little subjective. There was plenty of people there. The media took shots that made it look like fewer people were there. Trump could have easily said, yeah, there were quite a few people there. It was a good crowd. It was healthy. It was fine. And, very proud to run this country. But instead, this was the biggest crowd we've ever had for an inauguration ever. Well, that was also bullshit. So it's like you had a victory in hand saying, hey, the media, took photos from earlier in the event and there's some manipulation going on. They're trying to trick you. We actually had a good crowd. You could just stop there and you're the hero. But instead, we're going to go with, no, actually, not only was it not a small crowd, it was the biggest history in crowds. Biggest crowd history ever in history, crowds. What the fuck are you doing? At some point, it just turns absurd. And that's really where comics are. It's, it's in response to, I don't like these comics aren't good, which I'm sure if you're working in comics is a hurtful statement. It doesn't make you feel good. God, why would it? But to respond with, actually, everything is going better than it's ever gone before. It's huge. Everything is big. Please pay no attention to the fact that the majority of the people saying this, I mean, the hell, Heidi has done, e-begging for money, saying, ad revenue is not very good on the news site. A established comic book news site that's been going on for a long time with somebody who's often described as one of the most notable journalists in comics. But please, I need money because the site isn't doing too well in a time when comics are doing better than they ever have before. I mean, come on. Come on. At some point, it's like, all right, you guys all just think we're stupid here. That's the fundamental flaw. So, comic books, no, they're not doing great from a financial sales perspective. Hope they do better. There is good work. Mark Miller and Pepe Larraz doing this latest series, the mashup of all the Miller World characters and everything else. Art looks great. Story feels pretty deadly. It's fun. That comic should be selling 200, 300,000 copies. It is not. The industry itself isn't selling out comics that high. That's a problem for everybody. Anyway, thanks for listening.